Python has a number of data structures, which are sequences, and the most common type that we use are lists. So what is a list? A list is a set of comma-separated values, which are between square brackets. And so let's look down here at my students. So I've got a list of students. So I've got my square brackets at the front and the end. And then I have each data element or item in the list separated by a comma. So my first is Tom, that's a string, so I have my quotes around it. Then I have Joe, which is another string. Then I have Mary, Sue. And with Python, I'm allowed to include items in a list that are not of the same type. So just to show you here, I've got a number 4. Now this wouldn't be common. Normally you'd have a list of strings or a list of integers or etc. Okay, so if I print students, so as you see here, I'm using the round brackets around students here. It just prints off my list as my list is there. Okay, so it's just as simple as putting a comma between items in square brackets and you have a list. Okay, let's just look at some of the functions we can do here. A list has, each element in a list has a number or an index number, or that indicates its position. So it starts at position 0. So the first element in the list is position 0. If second is position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4. Okay. So if I wanted to print, so I've printed a string here, print value at index 2. Okay, and then I'm just concatenating that, adding to the end of that string this. So I'm printing students 2 gives me the data that's sitting at element position 2 or index position 2, whichever phrase you want to use. So 0, 1, 2, and that's Mary. So you can see here it's printed off across the bottom. Value at index 2 is Mary. I can change the value at position. So if I want to take Mary out and put Jack in her place, I can say students 2 is now equal to Jack. So that changed the value at position 2. Print the new value index 2, so same comment as before. You can see now it's Jack, and I'm going to print my whole list. You see Mary is gone and Jack is there. So this is how we replace a value at an index position. To remove an element from a list, we simply do delete, del, students 2, if we want to remove the item that's at position 2. Or if we don't know the position, which is quite common or quite likely, but we do know the value of the data element, we can remove it by giving it the data value. So it would be students, which is the list name, dot, remove, and then in brackets, the element that we want to remove. Okay. Python also provides a whole lot of features. Like with indexes, we can, so with lists, we can index them, we can slice them, we can add to them. It also provides functions to find the minimum and the max. So just look at 2 examples here. So to find the max, if I give it a list of integers, and I put this in a list called scores, and I do print max scores, it'll go through the list and print off the highest score. Actually, it happens to be the last number in the list, but it's printing 879. Now, it's not printing in because it's the last number, it's printing in because it's the highest integer value. If I do print max students, it's printing off the value Sue. So it's come through here and it's sorted them in alphabetical order and finding the highest alphabetical order. So going from Z back down. Okay, and similarly, we can do the same thing with min. So we'd have print min scores to find the minimum value in a list. Okay, lists, like I said before, there are plenty of expressions or functions we can do on list. Length, L-E-N, and then in brackets, and then inside the square brackets we give the list, or we give the list name. So for example, if I wanted to find the length of students, I would do len, round brackets, students, end my round brackets. Okay, but in this example, I'm just providing it with a list. I'm doing length, I'm giving it square brackets and a list, just got 1, 2, 3 in it. So the result from that would be 3. So it's found the length of the list, and that can be really useful for any of the sort of games you might want to build with kids. Let's say, for example, you were using a list to manage a card game. So you have your deck of cards and you have your hand of cards, or hand is a list, deck is a list. And if you want to find out how many cards you have in your hand, it would be length hand. Okay, Python also provides a plus and the multiplication to work with lists, and it works on lists the same way as it works on strings. So the plus means concatenate, and the multiplication sign means repetition. So it's the same as it is with strings, but rather than giving a new string, it gives you a new list. Of course, and that's different to how it would work with numbers. So if I take one list and I plus that to another list, I've concatenated those two lists into one. Okay, so let me just see, for example, let's say you had, again, let's go back to a card game, and you might have a list to manage your hand. And let's say the game you want to code is Snap. So you have a list then which are the cards that have been laid down on the table, and you have your own hand. And if you win the Snap, the cards that were laid down on the table are concatenated to the end of your hand. Okay, so you pick up the cards at the table, you add them to the back of your own hand, and that's how we would do it in recording it as a game. Okay, repetition. So high multiplied by 4, it just repeats what's in the list 4 times. Now I happen to have one value in the list, it repeats it 4 times. That's how it would do. These functions are really handy. So this is the membership function. So the word is in. So I'm looking for is a value in my list. So value in list, and it will return a Boolean true or false. Okay, so imagine I want to find out, do I have, again, let's look at another card game, and you want to find if, gosh, what's the card game where you try and find pairs? There's one with a rude name that I don't want to mention, but there's another one. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name. But you know, you have a game of cards where they ask you, do you have a 5? And you look at your hand, you see, do you have a 5? You hand the 5, if you have the 5, you have to hand the 5 over, whatever that game is called. Well, this is how that would work. So you'd have the card that has been requested from you. So let's say it's a 5. And then you'd have your cards in your hands. You say, is the card in my hand? True or false? Okay, we can use lists in if functions, as you can imagine, and also we can loop through them. So if I want to print my list, I've got to use a for function, so do for x in list name, print x, and it will print out my list for me. Okay, so let's just see some of that work. Okay, so I have here, I'm going to run this code. Okay, and let's just see it work. Okay, so there's my students that I had on my slideshow. I printed my students. I've changed the position. Okay, we've done all that in the lecture. Okay, if you wanted to play a game like guess the word, like hangman type things. So here I've got a guess word list which has just underscores in it. I've printed guess word, it's printed it out as a list. I've changed, let's say somebody guessed, does your word have an E? I've changed the position at letter at index 2 to E, so 0, 1, 2. I then print the word contains 5 characters, and I printed guess word, and see there's my E. Okay. Here I have scores. I do print the max score is 103. The min score is picked up at 3. The length of scores is 6, so there's 6 digits in there. Okay. If 98 in scores, print congratulations, we have a 98. Okay, so it's gone through scores. It's looked for, is 98 in there? Yes, it is. So if 98 in scores, print, else print that. And this is how we printed the list. Okay, so for x in scores, print x. Okay, if you want to code something like a memory game, so you know the games you play in the car with kids, I went to the shop and I bought oranges, and the next person says, I went to the shop and I bought oranges and a toothbrush. And the next person said, I went to the shop and I bought oranges, a toothbrush and a bucket, and so on. This is how you'd manage them in a list. Okay. Card games are implemented, the most simple way to implement them is through lists. So your deck would be something like, each character would start with H. H for hearts, D for diamonds, S for spades, C for clubs, and then you'd have H2, H3, H4, all the way up through. Then you have your picture cards, and then you'd have the diamonds, then you'd have the spades, and then you'd have your clubs. Okay, your hand would be an empty list, and then if you wanted to, deal the cards, I'd take a card off the list. So I'd take this card, and I'd add it to my hand, and I'd take this card, add it to my hand, and so on. And then in that, so when you, let's say something like 21, when you say twist, it's taking the card, adding it to your hand, removing it from the main list, obviously here. And then you have your hand. And then, of course, you can iterate through that. So you could do a string match on those. You could take the value of the card by pulling the second character from each of those items. So let's say this is 21. I can see I've got a 4 and a 3. So I have 7. So I'll say, well, twist again. It'll give me another value. So let's say it just pulls off a random card. It pulls off this one. I'm going to add it in here. So now I've got a 7 and a 6. So I've got 13. I'm probably going to say twist again. Okay, I'm going to pull a random card and pull the card over here. So what I got, 13, and what do I have? Sorry, a 4 and a 4 is 4 and 3 is 7, and 6 is 13, and 4 is 17. I'm probably going to stick. So I'll say stick, and then the next person. So that's sort of how you'd manage it. Obviously, you don't have dashes here. You have all the cards in. So the hearts, the diamonds, the spades, the clubs. So it's H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, H7, H8, H9, H10, H Jack, H Queen, H King, H Ace, and then you have the next card.